For nearly a century, something has been moving through the waters of Loch Ness, something the scientific establishment refuses to seriously investigate. We're not talking about folklore or legend. We're talking about sonar contacts that don't match any known species. We're talking about eyewitness accounts from military personnel and wildlife biologists that span 1,500 years and describe the exact same creature with impossible consistency. We're talking about a 755-foot deep freshwater environment where 99.999% of the loch remains unexplored. And we're talking about institutional pressure to suppress evidence that would fundamentally challenge what we think we know about unknown fauna in isolated ecosystems. In this investigation, we're examining the data they've tried to bury. When the Loch Ness Project conducted systematic sonar expeditions between 2001 and 2015, they documented something that never made mainstream news. Not the absence of anomalies, the opposite. Across 14 separate expeditions, acoustic contact events clustered in specific patterns. Deep underwater canyons near Urquhart Castle showed recurring sonar returns that registered on multiple frequency bands, indicating solid objects too large and behaviorally distinct from known fish species. These weren't random equipment glitches. They were repeatable, coordinated contacts that appeared during specific seasons, spring and autumn thermal transition periods, when temperature gradients create invisible barriers in the water column. Consider the behavioral implication. If a large animal occupied deep thermal refuge zones during daylight, ascending only during low-light conditions to feed, it would create exactly this sonar signature pattern. The evidence suggests deliberate avoidance of detection. But here's what's crucial. After 2015, the Loch Ness Project sonar publications abruptly stopped. Expeditions continued, but results went unpublished. Why would scientists halt documentation of their most interesting findings? The evidence suggests institutional pressure once tourism economics became entangled. In 2019, environmental DNA sampling at Loch Ness made international headlines. The Nature Communications study claimed to definitively prove the Loch Ness Monster doesn't exist by finding only known species DNA. But what exactly did the study measure? 24 sampling sites across a body of water that measures 23 miles long and 1.1 miles wide, a loch containing approximately 263 billion cubic meters of water. The researchers sampled roughly 0.001% of the loch's total volume. Now, eDNA methodology is powerful, but it operates under a critical assumption that organisms distribute their genetic material throughout the water column. But what if the creature exhibits deep-dwelling territorial behavior? What if it surfaces only during specific conditions? What if it occupies thermal refuge zones where water stratification prevents genetic material diffusion? The study's authors acknowledged these behavioral variables in their methodology section, then dismissed them without rigorous investigation. The evidence suggests they weren't actually testing for a cryptic, deep-dwelling apex predator. They were testing for a creature that behaved like a typical distributed fish species. Furthermore, large aquatic animals don't necessarily shed sufficient genetic material for detection in 24 sampling events. The absence of evidence here genuinely is not evidence of absence. It's evidence of inconclusive methodology applied to unfamiliar biology. The Loch Ness Monster narrative conventionally begins in 1933 with a newspaper story and a famous photograph. But the evidence suggests the timeline goes back much further. Historic Scotland's medieval archives contain accounts of water disturbances and creature sightings spanning 1,500 years. St. Columba's alleged encounter with a creature in 565 AD described a long-necked, humped-backed animal in the water, an account that persists in hagiographic texts. Now, skeptics dismiss this as folklore, but here's the analytical problem. Across these 1500 years before modern cryptozoology emerged, before hoaxes became profitable, accounts describe consistent morphological features: long neck, humped back, dark coloration, movement patterns suggesting aquatic predation. These descriptions map onto modern eyewitness accounts with remarkable fidelity. Historical accounts also describe sightings clustering during specific seasons and times, dawn and dusk, which aligns with cryptic animal behavior during low-light feeding periods. The evidence suggests either a documented unknown species maintained in isolated populations across centuries, or the most implausible alternative, a genetic memory of false description transmitting unchanged through 50-plus generations across cultures that rarely communicated. Which hypothesis requires more blind faith? The pattern becomes clear when you examine historical consistency. This isn't medieval fantasy embellishment. This is observational data that suggests something was genuinely. The 1934 surgeon's photo was exposed as a hoax in 2017, and this is where the evidence gets interesting. The debunking was legitimate. It was a toy submarine with a sculpted head attachment. But notice what happened next. Institutions weaponized the hoax revelation to delegitimize all Loch Ness evidence simultaneously. One fraudulent photograph became rhetorical justification for dismissing 4,000-plus documented sightings from military personnel, wildlife biologists, and credible witnesses. This is institutional pattern management, not scientific analysis. Once Loch Ness became economically significant, tourism, television specials, merchandise, incentive structures aligned towards skeptical resolution rather than ongoing investigation. A solved mystery is more marketable than genuine ambiguity. The evidence suggests the 2019 eDNA study was designed to provide institutional closure. Science has spoken. We've tested definitively. The creature doesn't exist. Let's move on. But science doesn't work by declaration. It works by methodology and uncertainty acknowledgement. We've explored perhaps 2% of the ocean's volume and discovered entire new species annually. Yet for a 755-foot-deep loch in Scotland, we're asked to accept definitive absence based on 24 sampling sites and the absence of evidence. The pattern becomes clear. Genuine scientific inquiry would mean admitting uncertainty. Instead, institutions have chosen narrative certainty over exploratory.
The Loch Ness Monster hypothesis fails on multiple methodological grounds. First, 2019 eDNA study, Environmental DNA, published in Nature Communications, examined 24 sites with comprehensive sampling protocols specifically designed to detect large vertebrates. This wasn't a limited probe. It was a definitive biodiversity census. The complaint that 24 sites represent insufficient coverage misunderstands eDNA methodology. Environmental DNA doesn't require direct organism contact. Large animals distributing biological material throughout aquatic systems will be detected via shedding skin, mucus, feces, and urine. Any large predatory fish or unknown megafauna would leave traceable genetic signatures across multiple sampling zones. The null result is genuinely significant. Second, the sonar anomaly claims conflate equipment artifact with biological phenomenon. Sonar returns in freshwater systems with complex bathymetry, thermoclines, and suspended particulates generate false contacts routinely. Without simultaneous visual confirmation, net sampling, or verified photographic evidence, sonar data alone proves nothing. The Loch Ness Project's reported anomalies were never corroborated through independent replication or peer-reviewed analysis. Third, the 1,500-year consistency argument commits the historical fallacy of retrofitting interpretation. Pre-modern accounts of water creatures reflect folkloric traditions, not biological evidence. St. Columba's 565 AD account exists in single hagiographic texts written centuries after the alleged event, not contemporaneous documentation. Finally, humans exhibit remarkable pattern completion abilities, apophenia. Given the Loch Ness Monster's cultural ubiquity, confirmation bias and selective attention create a perpetual evidence generation system where ambiguous stimuli become sighting data. The most parsimonious explanation, Loch Ness contains known fish species, and human perception, cultural mythology generates the mystery,